The first rays of sunlight were slicing through the blinds in my office when I realized my life had become a series of empty appointments. My name is Robert. I'm 45, and I work as a forestry engineer in a small town in Colorado. 15 years of marriage and a steady career gave me stability, but also a routine that was slowly suffocating any sense of purpose. 6 months ago, I accepted a temporary environmental research project that lets me spend entire days out in nature, away from the family and social expectations of the city. Those lonely days in the woods became my secret refuge. I've always been reserved and methodical, preferring the company of books and nature over forced social interactions. My job monitoring the environment is technically demanding, but gives me a kind of freedom I never find anywhere else. While I note down data about the local ecosystem, I truly feel like myself for the first time in years. If you've ever felt like you're living a life that isn't really your own, give this video a like. This story might make you question what really matters when no one's watching. My work base is a simple research cabin located about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, at the end of a dirt road that winds among majestic pines. During the week, I leave home on Monday before dawn, tell my wife I'm heading out to a series of data collection sites, and spend 5 days in this wooden sanctuary overlooking a small, crystal-clear lake. On autumn mornings, a mist hovers over the water like a ghostly blanket, while the scent of pine mixes with the damp earth. I always wake at 5:30 without an alarm. I brew strong coffee in the old cabin coffee maker and watch the sunrise from the porch, feeling a freedom I never experienced back in the city. It's the moment when I plan my day, jotting down the spots I need to visit, the samples to collect, the reports to finish. I spend most of the day trekking along remote trails, photographing changes in the vegetation and gathering data on the forest's health. In the afternoon, I return to the cabin, organize my notes, send reports to the department, and make a simple meal. Evenings are for reading, always with a glass of whiskey by my side. On weekends, I head back to urban life, with scheduled meals, predictable conversations, and restless sleep beside someone who increasingly feels like a stranger. It was on a Tuesday in October that the tranquility of my retreat was broken. I was checking water level markers in a creek when I heard a muffled cry followed by a loud thud. I dropped my equipment and ran toward the sound, finding a man lying near a rocky slope with a visibly injured leg. I slipped on wet rocks. "I think I twisted my ankle," he said, trying unsuccessfully to stand. "Stay still. I'm Robert. I work for the Forestry Service. Let me take a look." Daniel Mercer," he replied, extending his hand for a firm handshake that contradicted his vulnerable state. Daniel was 52, with fair skin offset by neatly cut salt and pepper hair, piercing gray eyes, and the bearing of someone used to taking charge. Even sitting in the mud with a pained expression, he radiated natural authority. His high-quality shirt, though stained with dirt, hinted at someone used to comfort. I later learned he was a surgeon from Boston who had set out on a solo hike to clear his mind after a particularly tough case. While I examined his swollen ankle, I noticed his hiking gear was top-notch, yet his knowledge about mountain trails seemed limited. I, who grew up practically in the woods, couldn't help but feel a bit superior to someone clearly out of their element. "It's not broken, but you won't be able to get back on your own," I explained. "My research cabin is about 30 minutes from here. We can call for help from there." With Daniel leaning on my shoulder, we started the slow journey back. What should have been a quick trip turned into nearly a 2-hour walk. During that time, we discovered some surprising coincidences. We were both only children, both fans of classic Russian literature, and we shared similar views on the fragility of human connection. At the cabin, while I prepared an ice pack for his ankle, Daniel looked at my book collection with genuine interest. "Dostoevsky next to plant identification manuals. You're an interesting mix. Nature and literature tackle the same fundamental issues, just from different angles," I replied, surprised at how easily the conversation flowed. We made dinner together. He sat at the counter chopping vegetables while I tended the fire, a simple meal of grilled trout with freshly picked herbs. Conversation flowed naturally, moving from our careers to life philosophies. There was something liberating about talking to someone who didn't have any preconceived ideas about me, who didn't see me as the husband or the engineer. With Daniel, I was just Robert, a man with his own thoughts and opinions. As night fell, I realized help wouldn't arrive until morning. An unexpected storm had brought down some trees on the main road, as the emergency service operator mentioned over the radio. Daniel would have to spend the night. "I hope I'm not imposing," he said, picking up on my momentary discomfort. "Not at all. I replied automatically, though inside I felt conflicted. This place meant my freedom, my escape from the structured life I led at home. Sharing it with someone, even temporarily, felt like an invasion. While I improvised a bed on the couch for my unexpected guest, Daniel noticed the wedding ring on my hand. "Family waiting for you at home?" I hesitated before replying. "Yes, my wife, 15 years together." The words came out mechanically, as if I were reciting facts about someone else. "Long time," Daniel commented calmly. "Happy?" The simplicity of the question caught me off guard. No one had asked that in years, not even myself. "It's complicated," I finally said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "The important things usually are complicated," Daniel replied, his gray eyes meeting mine for what felt like an eternity. That night, lying in bed and hearing Daniel's steady breathing in the next room, I thought about the layers of my life. A stable yet emotionally distant marriage, a respectable career, social expectations I dutifully met. And then there was this stranger, whose presence somehow made me question truths I'd accepted without a second thought. The conflict wasn't about Daniel. It was about the parts of me that had lain dormant for so long, and were now awakening in his presence. Dawn brought a light that wasn't confined just to the sky outside the cabin. I woke up earlier than usual, restless after a night of fragmented sleep. I found Daniel already awake, watching the lake from the porch with a steaming mug of coffee in his hands. His ankle looked better. The swelling had gone down considerably. "I woke up so I wouldn't miss this," he said, gesturing toward the golden spectacle unfolding on the water. In Boston, the buildings block half the sunrise. I sat there in silence with him, sharing the moment like old friends used to each other. The inexplicable familiarity was both unsettling and comforting. "The roads should be clear now. I can drive you back to town after breakfast," I offered, trying to sound casual. Daniel turned to me, his gray eyes reflecting the morning light. "I'm in no rush. Actually, if it's all right, I'd like to see your work. As a forestry engineer, I've always been curious about how you monitor entire ecosystems." That caught me off guard. My work had always been a solitary refuge. I'd never shared these experiences with anyone, not even with my wife, who showed polite, though clearly superficial interest in my research. "Are you sure? It's going to be a full day of walking on rough trails with that injured ankle of yours. I'm a doctor, remember? I know exactly how far I can push myself." His confident smile lit up his face. "Besides, I've got an excellent tour guide." That morning became something I'd never experienced before. My own private world seen through someone else's eyes. I led Daniel along milder trails, explaining the growth patterns of trees, the signs of climate shifts in wildflowers, and the complex interactions between species that form the forest's invisible web. He asked insightful questions, drawing surprising parallels between biological systems and the human body. "It's amazing how both of our jobs deal with living systems," he remarked, as we paused next to a crystal-clear stream. "You take care of whole forests, and I deal with organs and tissues. The scale is different, but the complexity and fragility are the same." "I never thought of it that way," I replied, realizing how his perspective added layers to my own understanding. "I guess we're both trying to preserve something that's always under threat." The sun at midday found us sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. We shared the simple snack I'd brought: sandwiches, fruit, and some fresh spring water. Conversation flowed effortlessly, leaping from work topics to childhood memories, to philosophies about life, and eventually into more personal territory. "And your marriage? 15 years? Is that enough time to truly know someone, or just to create the illusion that you do?" Daniel asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The question hung in the air for a moment. In any other context with any other person, it would have felt intrusive. But there, under a sky that stretched endlessly above us, it felt as natural as the landscape. "I suppose we create versions of the people we live with," I eventually said. "Versions that help us keep going, that make the routine bearable. And who sees the real you?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken meanings. I realized that there was more intimacy in that question than in years of conversations at home. "Maybe no one," I admitted softly. "Maybe I even forgot." Something shifted at that moment. An invisible barrier between us melted away. Daniel placed his hand on mine for a brief moment, a touch that conveyed understanding without judgment, closeness without intrusion. "It's strange," I went on, surprised by my own honesty. "Meeting you in less than 24 hours and feeling like I can say things I've never said to people I see every day. Sometimes you need a stranger to remind you who you really are," he replied, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. Someone who sees only the present, with no weight of the past or expectations for the future. The walk back to the cabin was wrapped in a different kind of silence. Not the silence of strangers anymore, but that comfortable quiet of people who don't need to fill the space between them with extra words. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple that transformed the familiar landscape into something almost mystical. On the cabin porch, as we watched the last remnants of daylight, Daniel looked at me and said, "Thanks for today, for sharing your world." "It was nice to have company," I replied sincerely. "I rarely show this place to anyone." "It must be hard," he said, "to have a place you truly love and not be able to share it with those closest to you." His words struck a deep truth I had long buried. It wasn't just the forest, the cabin, or even the work that kept me apart from my family life. It was a fundamental part of who I am. Night fell completely as we prepared dinner together in the small cabin kitchen. The limited space forced us into a careful dance, our bodies occasionally brushing against each other as we moved between the stove and the counter. Every little touch sent sparks up my skin, feelings I hadn't experienced in so long I'd almost forgotten they existed. I opened a bottle of whiskey I reserved for special occasions, even though I'd never really planned what those occasions might be. We sat close to the fireplace, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The golden flames highlighted Daniel's face, emphasizing the contours of his jaw and the thoughtful sparkle in his eyes. "You know what I miss most about modern medicine?" he asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Time. Time to really know your patients, to see beyond just the symptoms. Everything's become so rushed, so mechanical. "The forest taught me the value of taking things slow," I replied. "Some changes only reveal themselves when you watch the same place for years, with patience and care. Kind of like relationships," he observed, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his glass. "Maybe that's what's missing in my marriage," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Real attention, truly seeing someone, not just the surface." Daniel moved closer, the old sofa creaking under his weight. "It's funny how you can live with someone for years and still feel like there's a gap between you, and how you can meet someone for a day and feel a connection that just doesn't make sense," I added in a near whisper. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities. The fire snapped and crackled in the hearth, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like an ancient, secret melody. "Robert," Daniel said softly, my name sounding different on his lips. "There are moments in life that define us, moments when the choices we make reveal not just what we want, but who we really are." His words hit me like they were pulled right from my own unspoken thoughts. In that moment, I felt the carefully built layers of my life begin to crumble, revealing a truth that was as frightening as it was freeing. I was facing someone who saw me, truly saw me, for the first time in years. "I'm scared," I confessed. "Not of what might happen, but of going back to a life where I feel invisible after having been seen." Daniel reached out and gently traced a line along my jaw. His touch was as light as a feather, but as intense as lightning. "You don't have to decide your whole future right now. Just this moment." It felt as though the world had shrunk down to that cabin, that old sofa, that moment that hung between what was and what might be. When our lips finally met, it wasn't something entirely new. It was like rediscovering something I'd long forgotten, a truth that my body remembered even if my mind had denied it. The kiss deepened, with years of pent-up emotions surging like a river after a long winter thaw. My hands explored his face, his hair, his shoulders, rediscovering the pleasure of genuine touch and authentic connection. Every caress was a new discovery, every breath a small confession. Our clothes slowly fell away, pieces of an identity I no longer entirely belonged to. The firelight danced on our bare skin, creating complex patterns of shadow and light as intricate as the forests I studied. Our bodies moved in a natural, almost instinctive harmony, as if they were made for that very moment. Every touch sparked new feelings, every movement uncovered new layers of pleasure. It was like exploring a familiar territory under a completely new light, recognizing features that had always been there but never truly appreciated. The intensity built like a wave, carrying us into a place where words were unnecessary, where pure sensation, movement, and connection reigned. When we finally reached our peak together, it was like witnessing a rare and magnificent natural phenomenon, a breathtaking display like the Northern Lights or a meteor shower, something sublime and transcendent that defies everyday description. For a moment, every barrier fell away. between our bodies, between past and present, between who I thought I was and who I really was. Afterward, lying side by side and watching the fire slowly die out in the hearth, the world began to regain its familiar shape, though its edges now seemed slightly changed, like a landscape transformed by a powerful storm. Daniel traced lazy patterns on my arm with his fingertips, a tactile language that my body drank in eagerly. The silence between us was comfortable, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood and our synchronized breathing. "What are you thinking about?" he finally asked softly in the dim light. The simple question opened up a maze of thoughts and emotions I was just beginning to navigate. "In layers," I said after a moment, "like the layers of our lives. Some visible to everyone, others hidden even from ourselves." Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the last embers in the fireplace. "And now?" "Now one layer has been lifted," I replied, feeling both the weight and the release of the truth. "And I don't know how to go back to pretending I didn't see it." He leaned on his elbow, looking straight at me. "I'm not asking you to dismantle your life, Robert. What happened here was real, but that doesn't mean you have to make any drastic decisions right now." "How can you be so calm about it?" I asked, both admiring and envying his serenity. "Because I've learned that life rarely gives us clear answers," he said. "It just gives us moments of clarity amidst a lot of confusion." This was one of those moments. I finally got up, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, and walked over to the window. Outside, the night was clear, the sky sprinkled with stars in a way you'd never see in the city. "I have a life, you know. Commitments, responsibilities. A wife who trusts me." "I know," Daniel replied, his voice gentle and unjudgmental. "And I'm not here to tear that apart." I turned to face him, trying to soak in every detail of his face in the soft light of the cabin, as if I needed to memorize every feature. "Then why are you here?" A soft smile spread across his face. "I believe in meaningful accidents. Maybe I needed to twist my ankle at exactly the right moment so you'd find me. Perhaps you needed to find me to remember something essential about yourself." The depth of his words hit me hard. It wasn't just about physical attraction or a passing desire. It was about both of us finally seeing and being seen, about acknowledging parts of ourselves that had been silenced by years of obligations and expectations. "I don't know how to integrate this into my life," I admitted, feeling the weight of that truth. Daniel got up, grabbed the other blanket, and joined me by the window. "Maybe you don't have to integrate it. Maybe you just need to recognize that it exists." We stood side by side, watching the stars appear in the twilight. The closeness of his body brought a comfort I rarely felt. Not just a physical closeness, but a deep sense of not being alone in my inner journey. Over the next few hours, we talked in fragments, about our lives, about the choices we made and didn't make, about all the paths we might have taken. There was no judgment in our words, just raw honesty that comes when there's nothing left to hide. When the first rays of morning began to slip through the window, I came to a realization that was both painful and liberating. What happened between us wouldn't change my external commitments, but it had irrevocably changed my inner world. "Today I need to head back to town," Daniel said at last. "My flight to Boston leaves tonight." The outside world was seeping into our little bubble, bringing with it the bittersweet feeling of impending loss. "I know." Daniel took my hands in his touch familiar, yet still electrifying. "What happened here doesn't have to be a seismic shift in your life, Robert. It can simply be a personal revelation." I thought about his words, feeling the wisdom in them. How do I go back to my life knowing what I know about myself now? "With inner honesty," he said. "Self-knowledge doesn't demand immediate action sometimes. It just asks you to quietly acknowledge it." At that moment, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who had wandered into my life by chance and shown me parts of myself I never even knew existed. "I'll be back in Denver in 2 days," I said. "Back to my routine, my marriage, my carefully structured life. But something fundamental has changed." "You changed," Daniel gently corrected. "Not because you met me, but because you finally allowed yourself to see who you really are." As the sun rose over the horizon, bathing the cabin in golden light, I realized I was facing a moment of deep introspection. The encounter with Daniel hadn't just brought up long-suppressed desires. It exposed a fundamental truth. I was living only half a life, meeting external expectations while silencing my inner truth. "I don't know what to do with this revelation," I admitted, more to myself than to him. Daniel touched my face gently. "You don't need to decide everything right now. Some truths need time to be fully understood." A few hours later, as we packed our things in quiet contemplation and prepared to leave the cabin, I knew I would carry not just the memory of that encounter, but a new awareness that, once awakened, could never be put back to sleep. The drive back to civilization felt longer than it really was. Every bend in the dirt road brought me closer to the life I'd temporarily left behind, and further from the truth I'd discovered in that cabin. Daniel sat silently beside me in the car, occasionally pointing out an animal spotted among the trees or commenting on the wild beauty of the scenery. "We never really appreciate nature when we live in the city," he said, as a deer crossed our path. "We build parks as a poor imitation of it." "That's why I chose this job," I replied. "To stay connected with something more authentic than asphalt and concrete." The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who had sought authenticity in nature, had spent years denying the truth within myself. When we finally reached the edge of the small town, returning to reality became inescapable. Traffic lights, pedestrians, storefronts, all the elements of a scene that I no longer completely belonged to. "Let me drop you off at your hotel," I offered, slowing down as I merged into the urban traffic. Daniel nodded, his profile looking a bit more formal against the car window, as if he too was readjusting to the social world. The Summit Lodge on Main Street. The hotel was modest yet elegant, frequented mostly by tourists interested in hiking and fishing. I parked in front of the entrance and left the engine running, a subconscious signal that I didn't want to prolong the moment of goodbye. But as I turned off the car, I realized I wasn't ready to simply watch him go and vanish from my life. "Let me walk you to the reception," I said, trying to sound casual. In the lobby, the social reality fully took over. Courteous staff, other guests passing by, unknowing witnesses to a significant moment hidden in an ordinary farewell. "Well, I guess this is it," I said awkwardly after Daniel confirmed his reservation. He turned to me, his eyes studying my face as if trying to memorize every detail. "It doesn't have to be," he said softly, just for my ears. "Boston isn't that far away." His suggestion hung between us, full of possibilities and complications. "I have responsibilities here," I replied, the words sounding as hollow as I felt them. "We all have responsibilities, Robert," Daniel answered, his tone free of judgment. "The question is, do we have responsibilities to ourselves too?" A hotel staff member approached to help with our luggage. "I'm okay, thanks," Daniel said with a gesture toward his backpack. Once we were alone again, I felt the weight of an imminent decision. What had happened in that cabin could remain as a singular moment, a memory kept but not continued. Or it could be the beginning of something more, something that would require difficult, possibly painful choices. "I have your number from the incident report I filed," I said, trying to sound as professional as possible. A slight smile touched Daniel's lips. "Always so methodical, even now." "That's who I am," I replied, realizing there was some truth to it. It was who I'd become, not necessarily who I was at my core. Daniel extended his hand in a formal gesture, reflective of the intimacy we had shared only hours before. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Robert. Truly." I shook his hand, the contrast between the public formality and the private touches we'd exchanged weighing on me. Our eyes met and communicated what words couldn't in that hotel lobby, a silent promise, an unanswered question, a possibility hanging in the air. As Daniel turned to follow the staff member toward the elevator, he paused after a few steps. Turning back, he said, "You know what I've learned as a doctor, that people rarely regret what they did. They regret the things they never had the courage to do." With that, he stepped into the elevator, and the door closed between us with deliberate finality. I stood in the lobby for a few minutes, absorbing the emptiness his departure had left behind. Then, mechanically, I got back into the car and drove to my office at the forestry department to organize my pending reports, trying to bury myself in the familiar routine to anchor myself back to reality. But while I reviewed data on tree growth patterns and creek pollutant levels, my mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to our conversations, to that moment of clarity I experienced in Daniel's arms. At the end of the day, I drove home, the home I'd shared with my wife for 15 years. The familiar route, the familiar neighborhood houses, everything looked slightly changed, as if seen through a different lens. I parked in the garage and sat there in the car for a few minutes, taking a deep breath, preparing to resume the role I'd temporarily left behind. When I finally went inside, my wife was preparing dinner, the aroma of herbs and olive oil filling the kitchen. "Welcome back," she said without looking up from the pan. "How was the data collection?" "Productive," I replied, the half-truth weighing on me. "I got all the data I needed." We talked over dinner about everyday things. Her work, a phone call from our son at college, weekend plans. I participated automatically, like an actor reciting my lines, all the while part of my mind still back at the cabin, reliving scenes of an authenticity that now felt almost dreamlike. Later, lying in bed next to my sleeping wife, I stared up at the dark ceiling and faced the choices ahead. I could keep going as before, preserving the stability of my life and storing the experience with Daniel as a one-off moment of revelation. Or I could acknowledge that something fundamental had changed in me, not just because of him, but because a long-suppressed truth had finally surfaced. I picked up my phone from the bedside table and, hidden by the dark, typed a simple message to the number I'd noted in the official report. Still processing, but I haven't forgotten. R. The reply came almost immediately. Some revelations need time. I'll be in Denver again in 3 weeks. The choice will be yours. I put the phone back on the table, feeling a mix of anxiety and possibility opening before me. I hadn't made any irrevocable decisions, but I had opened a door that I could never completely close again. During the following week, I returned to my routine: work, home, social commitments, but with an awareness I'd never had before. I watched the way I interacted with my wife, noticing the established patterns and the quiet silences that had gradually turned into emotional distance, the familiarity that had replaced true intimacy. It wasn't that there wasn't any affection between us. There was history, commitment, a kind of love built over time living together. But something was missing, something I'd experienced, even briefly, with Daniel. The feeling of being fully seen and accepted, a connection that went beyond the physical to something deeper. 3 days before Daniel was scheduled to return to Denver, I made my decision. It wasn't a dramatic or impulsive choice, but one that honored both my new truth and my existing responsibilities. I knew I needed to have an honest conversation, first with myself, then with my wife, and finally with Daniel. I'm sitting on the cabin porch again, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and purple. 2 weeks have passed since Daniel went back to Boston, and my life has undergone both subtle and profound changes. The conversation with my wife was difficult, but necessary. I didn't mention Daniel by name. That encounter was just the catalyst, not the cause, of my inner transformation. Instead, I talked about the growing distance between us, about the parts of myself I'd kept repressed for years, about the need for greater honesty in our relationship. To my surprise, she didn't seem completely shocked. "I've felt you drifting away for years," she said, tears silently rolling down her face. "I just never knew how to reach you." We decided not to make any hasty decisions about our marriage. Instead, we agreed to give each other space for genuine reflection. She would temporarily go back to her sister's house, and I would stay at our home in the cabin. I promised to be completely honest from now on, no matter how painful that honesty might be. When Daniel returned to Denver as planned, we met on neutral ground, a quiet cafe in the city center. I told him about my conversation with my wife, about the process of rediscovery I had begun. "I can't promise anything right now," I told him frankly. "I'm just starting to figure out who I really am and what I truly want." Daniel listened with the same understanding he'd shown in the cabin. "I'm not asking for promises, Robert. Just be authentic, first with yourself, and maybe later with me." We agreed to keep in touch, perhaps meet up occasionally, but without any strict expectations or demands. He understood that I needed to walk my own path of self-discovery, that I couldn't just jump from one defined role to another without fully understanding my own needs and truths. Now, sitting alone with my thoughts, I realized that what happened in the cabin with Daniel wasn't so much about him specifically, but about the version of myself that emerged in his presence. A more authentic, complete version that had been lying dormant amid years of commitments and conformity. The future remains uncertain. I don't know if my marriage can be rebuilt on new, honest grounds, or if it has naturally run its course. I don't know if Daniel will be a significant chapter in my life, or just a brief encounter. I'm not sure how I'll merge all these parts of who I am into one coherent life, but I do know that I can't go back to living only partially, to silencing the essential parts of who I am just to fit external expectations. Once a revelation occurs, it cannot be undone. It must be accepted, integrated, and honored through conscious choices. I pick up my journal and jot down a thought that has stayed with me these last few weeks. Honesty is a journey, not a destination. It starts with the truth we tell ourselves and extends to the truths we share with others. As the stars begin to dot the twilight sky, I feel a peace that goes beyond uncertainty. It's not the peace of a complete resolution, but the peace that comes from finally being in tune with my own truth, despite all the complications it might bring. This journey of self-discovery didn't really start with Daniel, nor will it end with any one decision about my marriage or future relationships. It's an ongoing path of inner honesty, of aligning who I am deep down with how I live my life outwardly. If my story resonated with you in any way, if you feel parts of yourself remain unexplored or silenced, I want to encourage you to seek your own truth. It doesn't take a dramatic encounter or a sudden break. Sometimes, a quiet moment of honesty with yourself is all it needs. Life is too short to live only partially. Too often, we get so caught up in playing roles and meeting expectations that we lose touch with our deepest desires and truths. Reconnecting with those truths can be scary and complicated, but it's also incredibly liberating. If you felt something listening to my story, if something inside you was touched or awakened, give this video a like. Share your own reflections on authenticity and self-discovery in the comments, just your insights, nothing too personal. And if you want to explore more stories about personal growth and self-discovery, subscribe to this channel. After all, while our stories are unique in the details, they share universal themes of seeking meaning, genuine connection, and true acceptance. Now, as the night completely covers the lake, it isn't an ending, merely a transition, a moment of reflection before a new day brings fresh possibilities. Just as my own journey continues, page after page, written not only by fate or circumstance, but through conscious choices grounded in inner honesty. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. Until next time, when we'll continue exploring together the sometimes difficult, yet infinitely rewarding paths of authenticity.